on Her Excellency Ambassador Lilibeth R. Diapera, Philippine Ambassador to Mexico, to deliver the welcome remarks. Thank you very much.
To all our participants from various offices and universities in the Philippines and Mexico, members of the Diplomatic Corps, colleagues from other Philippine Foreign Service posts, Filipino honorary consuls, members of the Filipino communities under our jurisdiction, those who are joining us via our YouTube channel, friends, and my colleagues at the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to the 11th episode of La Historia Olvidada, Filipinas, Mexico. It's the 11th, but for the year, it will be the first it will be the first presentation. On behalf of the Embassy of the Philippines in Mexico, allow me to express my deepest appreciation to our distinguished guest speaker for the first episode of La Historia Olvidada Filipinas Mexico 2025, Dr. Nenita P. Domingo, who is a cultural anthropologist and lecturer at the University of California, USA. She will talk on unearthing Filipinos' past in Mexico, Manila Galleon, 1565-1815. This initiative started in October 2023 with the aim to highlight pivotal events and contexts that have shaped the engagements between the Philippines and Mexico, spanning from the 16th century to the contemporary period. Likewise, to elevate scholarly, diplomatic, and cultural exchanges between the Philippines and Mexico, and to understand the role of the Manila-Acapulco galleons in shaping relations and pioneering global trade. All our previous episodes were very successful, and this is due to our partners and resource speakers. The Philippine Embassy in Mexico and its partners, the University of the Philippines Diliman, El Colegio de San Luis, and the Philippine-Mexico Studies Program based at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico will endeavor to make the 2025 series a success as well. Once again, welcome everyone, and let's listen attentively to the presentation of Dr. Domingo. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po. Muchas gracias a todos. Mabuhay.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Diapera. I'd like to call on now Mr. Ralph Roldan, First Secretary Consul of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, to introduce our research speaker for today's session. Sir?
Thank you, NJ. Dr. Nita Pambi Domingo, PhD, is a Filipino language and culture lecturer at the University of California, Los Angeles, USA, for the past 25 years. She's a cultural anthropologist by training with focus on the Philippines. She's a prolific writer and has published and edited several books. The latest book she edited was one of the 5 finalists for the 2024 National Book Award in the Philippines for the Best Social Science Book Award, entitled Tinipong Tinig ng Kababaihan, Anthropology of Women's Voices from Priestesses to Presidents. Also published by University of the Philippines. Dr. Domingo is also a film actress and producer, where many of her films won several awards. Dr. Domingo holds a bachelor's degree in broadcast communication from the College of Mass Communication, University of the Philippines, Diliman, master and doctoral degrees in Philippine Studies from the same university. It's our honor and pleasure to have Dr. Nenita Pambi Domingo for this year, for the first installment of Historia Olvidada this year. Dr. Domingo, welcome.
Maraming salamat po. Una sa lahat, nagpapasalamat ako sa ating ambassador at sa inyong mga tumulong upang mabuo ang pagtatanghal na ito. So for today's topic, we're going to unearth Filipinos' past. So about the Manila Galleon. I myself does not know much about this very important aspect of Filipino culture. So I started actually with looking at the things, the that are available in the internet. But first of all, I would like to do my land acknowledgement. The UCLA Asian Languages and Cultures Department acknowledges the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tongvagar, the Los Angeles Basin, and South Channel Islands. As a land grant institution, we pay our respects to the ancestors, the elders, and our relatives, relations, past, present, and emerging. It is true that the Manila Galleon Acapulco trade belongs to the past of our countries, an event of the past, and if it were compared to an old manual typewriter, people may say it's obsolete and no longer useful in our present technological age. Some would say we should be concerned with the present and it would be better to problematize or talk about the present pressing issues of our contemporary time. As a Spanish saying goes, lo muerto, muerto está. Ang patay ay patay na. The dead is dead. That is, those things of the past no longer have import or relevance or should not concern us. However, is it indeed true that things of the past are irrelevant and are not important? Is there no benefit in analyzing the ways and works of our ancestors? Do we no longer need to know what they have accomplished in order for us to know what we should do? I guess everyone here knows the answer is that we need to know our past. That is why we are all here. Let me quote Eric Bloom about his idea of music, which could very well be parallel to how we view past history. Nothing more than one single sound of a musical composition belongs to the present. The rest is before and after. The past and future, remembrance and expectance. So hindi hihigit sa iisang tunog ng tugtugin ang nahihinggil sa kasalukuyan. Ang iba'y nauukol sa bago at matapos mayari ang tugtugin, ang iba na may kumakatawan sa nagdaan at haharapin. Sa gisag ng alaala at pag-asa. At ang sabi, ang diwa at lakas ng kinabukasang pumapaloob sa mga gawaing pangkasalukuyan ay hindi nakalalamang sa diwa at lakas ng kahapon. Ang nasa kahapoy nasa kasalukuyan, katulad din naman ng ang nasa kinabukasay nasa ngayon. Ang kahapon, hindi baga iyay isang kasalukuyang tumatayo lamang sa pangalawang hanay? Ang kahapoy wala sa ating likuran gaya ng ating malimit na paniniwala. Kung hindi, nasa harap natin. Ang nangabuwal sa dilim ng gabi, siyang nangunguna at hindi sumusunod sa atin. We are anxious to learn of the Philippines' past, which we need to understand in order to plan intelligently for the future. We want to know all that our ancestors knew and then add our own studies to theirs. Thus, we shall progress the faster because we can go on from where they left off. So human nature has the advantage over animal nature in that it is capable of learning and coordinating the experiences of the past so that it may use them in the future under similar situations. May kasabihan tayo sa Pilipino, ang hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan, di makararating sa paroroonan. So one who does not know how to look back will not be able to reach their destination. Ang nakikita nyo sa larawan, no, these are some of the things that we have been trading with our Southeast Asian neighbors. So we did barter trade with the Chinese, the Japanese, the Arabs, which basically are the things that we are also exporting to Acapulco, Mexico. What you see in this slide are Philippine gold, that's a gold belt, and some fabrics. So from Cebu, we get precious stones like carnelian, garnet, and ruby. And from Japan, the Japanese imports deer skins, antlers, and caged civet cats from the Philippine Islands. So at that time, there was no Philippines yet. I mean, there was no colonizers yet. So we were not called Philippines at that time. So the colonizers delineated the boundaries and territory of the country now known as the Philippines. So ito yung mga ine-export natin noon. Etong mga slides na ito, yung mga sumusunod, these are information that you can get from the internet, no? So, ano yung mga risk factors noon? Before, when Magellan came to the Philippines in 1521, the people of Cebu did not want copper, silver, or gold as payment from Magellan. But 20 years later, they would only accept silver payment. So unless the Ordaneta discovered an eastward route which was much shorter. But we usually romanticize the Manila Galleon trade, but it's a very difficult journey. You know, there are so many risk factors like the British pirates and Dutch invaders, diseases like beriberi, you know, due to lack of vitamin B and scurvy, dangerous storms, rats, overloaded ship, and of course there's corruption also, damp wooden environment for months on end and cramped spaces, food insecurity, drinking water scarcity, and deprivations far from home, being in a different culture and hearing a different language. So, with these objects that are being transported to Acapulco and then later to Spain, these transcultural objects are objects that have circulated beyond their place of origin, and in that movement acquired new meanings, adapted new uses, and transformed their destinations. So, the transculturation refers to the transformations that occur between cultures that come into contact with one another, resulting in the creation of new and unique cultural forms. Right now, the study of these objects or material culture and as well as the non-material is now called Hispanophone. So this is Urdaneta, and this is readily available in the internet. No, if you want to know more about this. This is for our students. So if they want to access this is in Wikipedia. So there's a general consensus that it took at least 4 months or 6 to 8 months, depending on the storms, to cross the Pacific Ocean from Manila to Acapulco. And the galleons were the main link between the Philippines and the vice-regal capital at Mexico City. And then once they land in Acapulco, they bring the goods to Spain itself. So can you imagine 250 years non-stop, the galleon plying between Manila and Mexico, bringing goods as well as people. So the wrecks of the Manila galleons are legends second only to the wrecks of treasure ships in the Caribbean. In 1568, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi's own ship, the San Pablo, weighing 300 tons, was the first Manila galleon to be wrecked en route to Mexico. Between the years 1576, when the Espiritu Santo was lost, and 1798, when the San Cristobal was lost, there were 20 Manila galleons wrecked within the Philippine archipelago. In 1587, A Manila galleon was captured by Thomas Cavendish, and in 1743 by George Anson. To my mind, objects and material culture, both tangible and intangible, like songs, stories, and folklore from the collective memories and unconscious of culture bearers, are sources from which we can reconstruct the past. They are texts that can be read and have stories to tell. They are silent objects and histories of the people on the margins of societies that have stories to tell, that have been silenced because they were deemed unimportant and of no consequence. These stories are the views and voices of the people from below and from the margins, not Eurocentric and not from the colonizers. My professor at UP, Dr. Sio Salazar, he calls this pantayong pananaw for us and from kami, no? The audience is us, and kami is from the Tagalog first person plural, we exclusive, and tayo inclusive, the marginalized and forgotten. So in this talk, I'm communicating with my fellow Filipinos primarily. This is for us. This presentation explores the transcultural objects from the contact among Spain, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. The transcultural objects tell the historical and cultural links between places such as Mexico and Japan, Brazil and Africa, and the Philippines and Spain. The study of the cultural contact between Spanish-speaking countries and diasporic communities and the field of study has recently been termed Studies of the Global Hispanophone. Much has been said about the influence of Mexico in Philippine culture, for traditional history tells us about rulers and victors. In the case of the Philippines, the Viceroyalty of Mexico. For this presentation, the focus is on the transcultural objects identified as coming from the Philippines. One description of the Filipino native was this daughter of the Celias, the daughter of pardon my pronunciation, Chief Cobaway, the principal chiefly hosted the Lewis and Clark expedition during their 1805-1806 stay at Fort Clatsop. They described the survivors as having tails on their heads, long ponytails that the children pulled playfully. This is consistent with native Filipino mariners' hairstyles of the late 17th century. Although admittedly it is consistent with other mariners' hairstyles as well. And on this slide, you will see what they call a hydrographical and chorographical chart of the Philippine Islands. And the map is a graphic expression of the Jesuits' penchant for the trading. The drawing lists Filipinas' alleged natural resources like gold, pearls, cinnamon, indigo, medicinal herbs, and the New World plants like cacao and tobacco. Around the map are expressive illustrations of the varied trading communities in the islands and agricultural work and cultivation of useful plants like bamboo, betel, coconuts, and the New World's fruits, papaya and jackfruit or what we know as langka. At the outset, religious and secular priests have the same advantages and privileges as other Spanish traders. So no Indians can do the trading. So the Spanish clerics, they have the Ecclesiastical Cabildo of Manila, which is composed of priests. That was a trading bloc formed to supplement the incomes of the clerics. Their involvement in the galleon trade was as eager as those of the other traders. So between 1609 and 1616, 9 galleons and 6 galleys were constructed in the Philippine shipyards. The average cost was 78,000 pesos per galleon and at least 2,000 trees. According to historical records, 108 galleons sailed from Manila to Mexico between 1565 and 1815 as part of the Manila galleon trade route. And according to available information, most historians agree that 108 Manila galleons were built in the Philippines between 1565 and 1815, with almost all of them being crafted primarily within the Philippine shipyards. And the trade route, as we all know, is known as the Manila Galleon trade. So, one famous galleon that was sunk under the command of Dr. Antonio de Morga, author of Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, was the San Diego. We may ask, what piece of Philippine history can we learn from the archaeological remains of the San Diego? After 6 hours of battle with the Dutch on December 12, 1600, from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., the San Diego sank, and it laid at the bottom of the sea for many centuries off the coast of the small island of Fortuna, south of Manila Bay, until 1992, when Frank Godiot, a French underwater archaeologist, discovered it. According to Fish, the iron pins used in the galleon turned warship must have been built at Cebu Shipyard Foundry. The recovery of the timber provided information on the types of woods the Spanish used to build the ship, according to plan and methods used in Spain during the 16th century. The analysis of the timber use yielded 6 species of, or 5, if the 2 types of terminalia would be classified as a single species. The keel, take a look at this, it's 77 feet 9 inches in length, was made from a Philippine tree called bitaog. It could grow up to 131 feet in length. It is used as ship's frames, rudders, and ceiling plates. Another hardwood is kalumpit. It is strong, durable, and insect-proof. And it served as keelson. Keelson is the center line structure running the length of the ship. It is similar to Nara and Molave in hardness. So the rudder and the stern post, for this they use the betis. It is a strong tropical hardwood used for the rudder, and the rudder is used for steering the vessel. It is termite and shipworm resistant. For the frame, bitaog wood was used for the planks, and in the archaeological remains that were found, there were 52 floor planks that were still extant. Can you imagine how long it has been underwater, and yet it's still there and can be identified by the scientists? And there are 5 stringers. These are very long planks, ensure the longitudinal cohesion of the hull. And 2 types of woods were used, the apitong and the terminalia. And this is a resinous, medium hard to hard, solid, insect resistant, and medium density. And for caulking, materials for the galleon, there is evidence that coconut husk mixed with pili nut oil, but this information still need further study. So what are the goods that come from the Philippines? So these are the exports from the provinces: rice, beeswax, civet, ambergris, gold. Ambergris is the excretion from the whale. Gold and pelts. Pelts are skin of animals. Wine and oil. Textiles and embroideries. We also export gold dust, wax, abaca, hemp, used in the production of ropes, cables, cordage, and rigging. Cloths or cotton mantas produced in Ilocos for use as sails on the galleons and other sea vessels. Cebu is famous for the gauze, which was highly sought after by Mexican customers. Uh, Also, cotton stockings, bed covers from Lubang and Ilocos, blankets, hammocks, and petticoats from Ilocos, linen sheets, tablecloths, and bed canopies. Some cinnamon in smaller quantities compared to other Asian countries are also exported. So 60,000 to 70,000 pesos worth of gold was shipped annually to Mexico from the Philippines, according to Governor Diego Ronquillo, who ruled in 1583 to 1584. In historical records, there is proof that the galleons carried Philippine gold. For example, is the Santa Ana galleon captured by Thomas Cavendish off the coast of California in 1587 from Manila to Acapulco. And it said it included Philippine gold. Mostly, the crew members of galleons were Filipinos. There were also some Japanese and other South Asians, but it's 50% Filipinos. So these were the first disasters that the galleons encountered. So the first one was in June 1565, the return of the San Pablo under Felipe de Salcedo, grandson of Legazpi. It carried a small shipment of cinnamon purchased in Mindanao on the royal account, meaning it was the King of Spain's account. And in 1568, the San Pablo was lost at the Ladrones, which means thieves, and it carried 15,000 pounds of cinnamon for the king and 25,000 consigned by private individuals to help them financially. So the other one is the San Jose of 1657, which was discovered drifting south of the port of Acapulco, intact with all cargo undisturbed. But the entire crew, down to the last man, was dead. They're all dead because of starvation or disease. It had been at sea for more than a year. So can you imagine being at sea for more than a year? Approximately 200 men crew and 16 passengers of the galleon wreck, believed to be the Santo Cristo de Burgos, survived the disaster and remained on the coast near the broken ship for some weeks or months, living precariously and probably dependent on native generosity, hoping for rescue by Spanish search ships from Mexico. But no one came. The men had three choices. They could seek to return to Mexico by land or by sea in small makeshift watercraft a distance of some 3,000 miles, or they could remain on the coast, perhaps integrating with and marrying into the native community, or at least hope to stay in the good graces of the local people, or they might become victims, being taken as slaves, killed, or otherwise engulfed in inter-ethnic conflict. The wreck is mentioned in the oral tradition of coastal native peoples and was one of its most enduring outcomes. Much has been written about these oral traditions, especially in the popular and early historical literatures of the Pacific Northwest. So, the Philippines ought to be, according to Legazpi in 1569, this was the first trip of the galleon. The Philippines ought to be considered of little importance. That's what Legazpi said in his letter. Because the native civilization was too primitive and poor to promise a profitable trade in manufactured goods. And he said, cinnamon only grew in Mindanao and production was not of much commercial quantity. So, but contrary to the experience of Magellan in 1521, Magellan refused to accept the gift of gold by the Datu the gold was as big as the eggs or the walnuts, because he said, according to the account of Pigafetta, it might spoil the trade between the two countries. So Legazpi, he said there is small quantities of gold found in the possession of the natives, and he said the source was unknown. And if you would remember, I showed you some gold belt and gold posuelo or cups or scabbard at the beginning of this presentation. But Legazpi said they don't know where it's coming from. So most of the ships of the galleons, they were silk ships, because silks that they export in every stage of manufacture, every variety of weave and pattern. And the customers were Spaniards in Mexico and Peru. In 1765, the Viceroy Crucilias informed the king that the China ship, so the galleon is also called China, no, now China, imported Flemish laces and many other kinds of European goods to Nueva España. Nueva España is also Mexico, or New Spain. And there were more than 50,000 skirts, velvet bodices, clocks, robes, kimonos, stockings, silk bed covers, tapestries, hankies, tablecloths, napkins, rich vestments for church and convents from Sonora to Chile, finer cottons from Bengal, 80,000 combs in Siemens chess, spices from Moluccas, Java and Ceylon, musk, borax, and red lead. There were also gold bullions or manufactured articles, although there was a legal ban on the importation of jewelry from the Orient. In 1767, there was a large consignment confiscated at Acapulco. There were hundreds of rings set with rubies, diamonds, crucifixes, reliquaries, spittoons, Persian and Chinese rugs and carpets. So these are the things that are transported to Acapulco and then to Spain. So here's an estimate of the Trans-Pacific slave trade and free Asian migration. So according to Oropesa, this is the lowest. It was calculated at 7,375 to 20,000 free or enslaved Asian peoples during the colonial period. And on the high end, Slack conjectured a minimum of 40,000 to 60,000 and a maximum of 100,000 Asians arrived during the same period. On the other hand, Diego Javier Luis believes Slack's range comes closest to a realistic count of Asians who boarded a galleon for the Americas, including those who died en route, and their descendants who were born there during the early modern period. It's difficult to track the Asians and the Filipinos because thousands of itinerant sailors, at least 100 per year, who disembark in Acapulco or elsewhere along the coast and then sailed back to the Philippines at the end of the trade season. Some of them, their origins, place of origins are not indicated. And because they belong to the lowest class of peoples, they are not important. And also, thousands of Asians died during the Pacific crossing due to storms, the bitter cold, exposure and shipwreck, violent punishment, disease, and malnourishment. An untold number of Asians and their descendants were born in the Americas over half a dozen or more generations, and many of them untraceable in colonial documents because they were of mixed heritage. Several of the ships sailed directly to Peru during the 16th century and to San Blas, Mexico in the 18th and 19th centuries, including their crews. So we would ask, did these people constitute early modern Asian diasporas in the Americas? So diaspora is given the definition of any dispersion or migration to two or more sites. And they have a homeland consciousness and the maintenance of a sociocultural identity distinct from that of the receiving community, which is, in our case, Mexico. The colonial archives hold only traces of evidence because their records rarely account for non-Europeans, and if they do, are colored by their Western biases. For enslaved people, captives rarely record a desire to go back to their life before being enslaved, and most appear in the archive only as names in notarial records, property wills, or criminals in court cases. And some of these Indio-Chinos, which are the Filipinos, they sign their names in the affidavits in baybayin. So what are the goods from Filipinas, aside from, I have mentioned a few already. So the slave masters characterized Chinos as good domestic servants. So they placed regular orders with traders to bring Chino slaves for their households. Captain Miguel de Sosa, a Portuguese resident of Puebla, ordered a modest and attractive chinita to serve as a comfort for him and his spouse. Meanwhile, the Viceroy of Mexico, Marquis de Galvez, had placed a special order for a pretty and graceful slaves for his palace, but ended up with Sosa because there was heavy rains and flooding, and the staff was unable to pick her up at the port. So it is evident that wealthy individuals living in Mexico placed regular orders for the delivery of Chino slaves to work in their households. So this is from Ceja's book, and she tabulated the number of slaves. So coming from the Philippines, there were 62 from Cagayan, Calamian, Calubian, Simarin, Cavite, Lubao, Manila, Pampanga, Panay, and Pasiculas. And most Muslim Filipinos too in Jolo and Mindanao and Zamboanga. So there's 62, 17. They get a lot of slaves from India and Bengal if you put them together. And then really very few from the other nations. So in her research, there's a category called unrecognizable. So because it does not indicate where they came from. So maybe they came from Bali, from Pali, from Papua New Guinea. And these slaves listed only as from Manila because sometimes the Portuguese bring them to Manila and then they are shipped through the Galleon, the Manila Galleon. And they cannot be certain if they are natives of the Philippines. Only those listed as natives of or born in a specific place were categorized in this table. So from Japan, only 4. Macau, only 3. In Timor, only 2. Indonesia has more, 15. Malaysia has 9. Sri Lanka, 6. So the database was 598 Chino slaves. All of them were called Chino slaves. So what do the men do? No, they become cacao planters. Filipinos who are skilled in coconut planting, they were called Indio Chinos. So they work in the encomienda and in the haciendas tending to the coconut plantation. And Filipinos are, they become common seamen, carpenters, barbers, phlebotomists. And according to Francisco Leandro de Viana, Filipinos were natural mariners, agile in maneuvers on shipboard and learns quickly nautical terms and whatever a good mariner ought to know. So studies have shown evidence of Filipino ancestry in certain regions of Mexico, particularly in Guerrero State. Filipinos who worked in the galleons were mistreated by the Spaniards and Mexican crew members. They were given half the rations given to Spaniards. In 1626, a law was levied a tax of 4,000 reales or 500 pesos for every slave brought in from the Philippines. So, para talagang merchandise ang mga tao, no? So, it is customary for passengers to dispose of their personal servants at the end of the voyage. So, maybe they are sold to other enslavers. Philippine natives usually made up at least 50% of the galleon crew. Those who come from the coastal regions on Luzon were highly prized for their navigational and seafaring abilities. Most of these recruits come from Parañaque, Don Galo, Malate, Kawit, San Roque, and Las Piñas. Sailors from the Philippines did not want to return, except there's this exception. His name is Francisco de Acuña. He's a Philippine sailor from Parañaque who made an unbelievable 27 trans-Pacific round trips. But most of the Filipino Chinos, they jump ship. While in Mexico, later, Chinos can go to court and contest ruling against them. Like, for example, they cannot wear Spanish clothes. Barbers perform the work of the phlebotomists. And Gonzalo de la Mota and company petitioned for these limited licenses. They also asked for licenses to carry arms. So in 1542, there was the law that was enacted called the New Laws, which prohibited enslavement. So Indian rebels against the crown continued to be legally enslaved as punishment. Also, the Principalia in the Philippines are allowed to have their slaves. So Chinos were formally emancipated in 1672, but not the Afro-Americans, only later in 1829. So the colonial officials in Mexico included Chinos and were thus freed and turned to native vassals by royal mandate. So here's an exception. His name is Domingo de Villalobos. He is a Kapampangan Philippine trader of Michoacan, and he fell sick. He stayed in the home of another Kapampangan named Alonso Gutierrez, his friend and business associate. To express his gratitude, he gifted Gutierrez's indigenous wife, Doña Mariana, a petticoat from the Philippine region of Pampanga. And according to Diego Javier Luis in his book, The First Asians in the Americas, it was an object of both material and sentimental value to both Villalobos and Gutierrez. Before Villalobos died of disease in 1618, he named his mother his heir. His mother is Monica Binangan, who still lived in the Philippines. And he made Gutierrez his executor. In 1593, the laws of the Indies abolished slavery. This is 1592, no? Indochinos, but not for the Africans and Principalia in the Philippines who could still own slaves. So, how social mobility, how can the Indios move up? It's through good fortune and with much hardship. Some exceptions were noted down by Diego Javier. He said there were 3 Asians who were able to enroll in the Royal University of Mexico, which was operational from 1553 to 1865. The Japanese Indio Manuel de Santa Fe, he finished his degree of Bachelor of Philosophy in 1674. Then there is the Kapampangan Nicolas de la Peña, who enrolled in 1691, a student of rhetoric, and the Philippine native Ignacio de Orruega Manesay, who enrolled as a student in 1695. Another Indochino, his name is Juan Alonso, was the first Asian to receive licenses in Nueva España to ride horseback with a bit and saddle in 1591, and to lead a larger pack of mules and carry a sword and a dagger. Chinos were limited only to own 6 mules. So the natives of the Philippines under the law were true Indians, according to Cejas. Another Kapampangan man named Marcos de Villanueva arrived in Mexico in 1646, where he married a Spanish woman and was quickly licensed to carry a harquebus. This is an early type of portable gun supported on a tripod or a fortress. So those who rendered loyal service to the crown on Luzon, um, head of 80 infantrymen during the Chinese Rebellion in 1639, or on Ternate or on Mindanao and against the Dutch, or the Chinos from Pampanga, they have special privileges for their service to the crown. So it's no wonder if you would notice these are all Kapampangan. This may be the reason why there is Mexico in Pampanga. No? So it's really difficult to advance in the Newfoundland. They are subject to racial profiling. It depends on the color of skin, connections to Spaniards. They could not loan money, hire apprentices, apply for licenses, or purchase enslaved people. Chinos and slaves were refused treatment in hospitals like the Hospital de Nuestra Señora in Mexico City. Such was the case of Manuel de la Cruz, enslaved Chino. They were not free subjects with privileges like the regular vassals of the crown. They are merchandise, commodities to be bought and sold, bartered, paraded, inherited, exploited, and even destroyed if necessary to the enslaver. So, what are the Filipinos' contribution to Mexico? So there are Mexican officials of Filipino ancestry. So here in the picture, you would see the Presidentes Descendientes de Filipinos. There's Vicente Guerrero, Juan Alvarez, Venustiano Carranza, Lázaro Cardenas. And then Grandes Mexicanos de Origen Filipino. There's Gasparianga, Vicenta Riva, Palacio, Emiliano Zapata, Agustin Lara. So, in Guerrero, there are a lot of Mexicanos whose surname is Maganda. And Maganda is a Filipino word which means beautiful. And according to the book that we have been quoting, Isidro Montes de Oca, one of those mentioned in the previous slide, and Francisco Mongoy, they were both brigade commanders during the Mexican struggle for independence. De Oca rose to the rank of general in Mexico's Revolutionary Army and became General Vicente Guerrero's lieutenant commander. Meanwhile, Francisco Mongoy became Guerrero's military commander during Mexico's War of Independence. And there is a town in Guerrero which is named La Union de Isidoro Montes de Oca. In 1618, 75 natives were on board the Espiritu Santo as common seamen, but only 5 returned. 17 in the course of the Galleon's run of 2.5 centuries. Innumerable natives from the Philippines deserted and settled in the Americas, married local women, and created a stable population in Mexico City, Acapulco, and surrounding areas, which acted as a magnet that attracted other seamen to desert and remain in the Americas. These former seamen took up occupations as farmers, distillers of tuba, craftsmen, militiamen, barbers, phlebotomists, peddlers, and so on. The Philippine natives and their descendants formed a mixed-race, low-caste enclave in Mexican colonial society, which nonetheless left a mark on mainstream Mexican culture and gave it an Oriental heritage. There were other Asians there, as about 600 slaves arrived in Mexico from across the Pacific each year from 1600 to 1673. So, one legacy of the Filipinos in Mexico is coconut cultivation. It was introduced in Colima southwest Mexico in 1593, but there's no definite culture complex associated with it locally except for eating the meat. In 1521, after 40 years of probable existence of the coconut, they have not found use for it. So uh, there was a fast development in Acapulco to Colima that by 1619, San Josef Tecolapa in Colima had 50 married chinos with their own alcalde. So the chinos were active wage laborers, bonded debtors, and enslaved workers in the tuba plantations in Tecpan, Atoyaque, Kasitlan in 17th century. So pardon my pronunciation. In 1644, 5 Indios Chinos, Miguel Pano, Sebastian de la Cruz, Juan de Triana, Francisco Ramos, and Nicolas Mananquel were operating their own tuba plantations. So they have become entrepreneurs. And here are some pictures of the coconuts that can be found right now in Mexico. This is from Google Earth. So there's the palapa, which is very similar to the ones that we use in Bahay Kubo. There's more. This is in San Blas, Nayarit. And this is the Del Coco Colima. So you can see the coconut plants on both sides of the street. More. This is in Guerrero. More coconuts. And for food, the Mexicans have coconut in their dishes too, aside from eating the main meat. They also use rice, ginataan, and nilugaw. So there are also 250 botanical species from Asia that the Mexicans have used also. Also cinnamon from Mindanao, which we have already mentioned earlier. So in 1697, Carreri had mongos for lunch. Mongo, no, cultivated in the Philippines, believed to have originated in India. Regarding building materials, palapa is a word that is known in Mexico. These are the coconut fronds used for roofing. Mantas are heavy sheeting of Ilocos, sheeting from Ilocos, and the distinctive Philippine lompotes were always staple exports to the American market. In 1792, there was one lot of 998 white cotton shirts that were brought to Mexico, but then they were not able to sell it because they were short, because they were made for Filipino natives. And then there were also several alligator teeth capped with gold. And for the Visayans, I believe they used this as amulet. And then there were also pearls, no, pearl as big as dove's egg brought by a mariner. And during the last of the 18th century, there were also Manila cigars to Spanish America through Acapulco and beeswax. And teak and other Philippine hardwood used for ships. So these are what we have influenced Mexico. So more products from the Philippines. So we have mentioned the Manila hemp, spices, and tropical fruits between Manila and Acapulco, creating a major economic link between the two regions. Filipino migrants, including sailors and merchants, traveled to Mexico on the galleons, contributing to a mixed population in coastal towns, particularly Acapulco. So also Filipino customs and culinary practices like the preparation of tuba and chamoy were introduced to Mexico. Chamoy is a saucy condiment made of dried chilies, lime juice, and fruit, usually mango and apricot or plum. So for amusements, according to Ricardo Pinzon, they know sarangola and they spell it with a Z. There's also sabong or cockfighting. And I quote this from Irene Villa Escusa. Ilya, she said, linguistic transculturation is part of the lives and afterlives of these objects, whose original names, new names, alternative spellings, and adaptations are as necessary as they are innovative. Linguistic transculturation is also evidence of the locality of transcultural objects. Their existence and meaning in a particular place and time is the result of a global influences. Foreign words in local languages are best understood by the communities in which they are created, and therefore where they feel at home. So, Chateau game. Do you guys know Chateau? No, Chateau refers to traditional Filipino game. Chateau in Tagalog, Chateau, also spelled Chateau. This is played using two sticks, one longer than the other. One player acts as a hitter using a stick to hit a small piece of wood placed in a slightly dug hole. And the aim is to make it fly high enough for the other player, the catcher, to hit it with their own stick. And the goal is to keep it airborne by hitting it back and forth between players. And Ricardo Pinzon has mentioned this also. So what are some Filipino words? So we know already the palapa and then the tuba, the maganda, no, lugaw, ginatan, and saranggola. These are some words that the Mexicans use which came from our language. So Parian is from Brunei. Amalay is Padian. This is the Chinese quarter. No? This just tells us the etymology of the word. So there are places in Mexico that are named after the Philippines. So this one is it's called. This is the address of one old lady that that Veneracion spoke to. This is their address, 8 Filipinenses, Oaxaca. So Jaime Veneracion and his wife Corazon went to the annual Mais Festival and spoke to old women and said, "So, you are Filipinos," sabi ng matanda. "We are also Filipinos because our great-great-grandfather was a Filipino by the name of Lorenzo Paulo, whom they lovingly call Nuestro Patron, one of the founding fathers of the town. So they are held as local folk heroes. And also, thanks to Claude Tayag and Ricardo Pinzon, there's also a place called Colonia Filipinas. And this is how to get there. It's far from Acapulco. And this is a street. It's actually very small. It's just a street. It's called Colonia Filipinas. This is from Google Earth. And here's another view of Colonia Filipinas. So, the Parian. This is the map showing the location of the Parian de Filipinas. And the next slide following this is an artwork of Mexico's Plaza Mayor. According to engineer Manuel Aguirre Botello, who administers the site, this website, the artist is unknown. The proportions are not exact, but it shows an excellent perspective of where the Parian was situated. So this is the artwork. This is in, but it was burned down, so it's not existing anymore. So with the Galleon trade, we had transfer of technology as well. So the artillery, the lantakas, the bells from the Philippines were melted and turned into cannons. Shipbuilding technology, the distillation, the lambanog, the cocoa wine, and the coconut cultivation. These are our contribution to Mexican culture. And this is the stills that they used to distill, which led them to do the tequila, no? Because before they did not distill their alcohol. Some religious practices, they also have really the entierro, the dead cries. And For the Filipinos, we have the Lutrina. This is similar to what they do in Mexico, asking for rain. And then ivories. So like the Middle Ages in Europe, the sculptors do not sign their work because they create images as an offering to God. So images of the Blessed Virgin, Jesus, and these are the vehicles and tools for the conversion of the natives. So art historians and anthropologists have largely seen exchange of objects as part of human beings' ways of learning, evolving, and relating to each other. Objects are therefore a source of knowledge. They speak and tell stories. And what is more, in helping translate everyday practices from one place to another. So they are agents of change and mediators of culture. So this is an example, the baby Jesus. This is from the Philippines, the Virgin Mary. The Immaculate Conception is one of the patron saints of the Philippines, and so is the Guadalupe. So the pose of the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception, here's a fuller rendering of the type that would feature a crescent moon beneath her feet. But this one, it's an there are enormous number of ivory images of the Virgin that were produced in the Philippines. And many, like this example, show her robe distinctively tucked in back. The back of her head and hair were carved separately to permit the insertion of glass eyes, a realistic touch found in much Spanish devotional sculpture. Here's another sculpture of the Madonna and Child. This is interesting because there's the Chinese characters on the bottom of this sculpture and indicate the colors used for the various patterns on the robes and help catalog it as work of art produced by an artist trained in China, as does the style of the rocks upon which the Madonna sits. The mournful expression of the face of the Virgin, the clasped hands, and the seated position are typical of representations of the mourning Madonna. So, these are the works of Fujian Chinese now working in the Philippines. Here's another view, 3/4. If you would notice, the robes are very intricate. It was done in Ecuador, but the ivories came from the Philippines. So the ivory heads of Mary and Joseph were among the numerous such parts imported to America. So the style of the figures polychromy reveals that they were set into their wooden bodies in Ecuador. No? Artists there practice a distinctive technique to embellish the garments of their sculptures, applying gold patterns over the colored backgrounds rather than scratching them through. As in true estofado, in art it is used to describe a decorative technique imitating gold brocade. So for clothing, they adapted our ikat technique in weaving. So the Filipino chinos worked in obrajes or textile factory. The sails used in the galleons come from the Philippines. We mentioned the gauze from Cebu. And tablecloths, napkins, fine denim from Ilocos, handkerchiefs and skirt lengths from Bohol, tablecloths from Lucban, Old Tayabas province, rattan mats, abaca cloth for sacks from Bicol, covers with tinsel flowers from Cebu. So these are exclusively coming from the Philippines. So the ropa de China basically consists of a wrap, a blouse, a slip, and a skirt. Carl Nebel, a German architect, La China Mexicana, the picture on top, mejor conocida como China Poblana. And below it, you would see is the Barot Saya by Henry Valentin. So China Poblana and the Barot Saya look identical actually, except for the patterns. So, and then of course, the Guayabera and the Barong Tagalog, it's being contested because it's a question of which came first, the chicken or the egg, because there are claims from Mexico, Cuba, and Ecuador. But the Philippines has documented indications the barong was already in use pre-Hispanic times. So the Manton de Manila, the Manila shawl, a silk shawl originally made with chinoiserie style motifs in China and derived from the Filipino pañuelo, was popular in colonial Latin America but failed to remain so. In Spain, it is still today considered a quintessentially traditional Spanish garment, worn, for example, by flamenco dancers and Andalusian women during festivities. The Manton de Manila, however, is believed to have influenced the designs of the Latin American rebozo, a long flat garment hand-woven from cotton, wool, silk, or rayon, like a shawl and worn by Mexican women. These objects tell us about connected histories, to use Sanjay's term. They help us to interpret networks of cultural context and economic exchanges between distant populations at a global level. Simultaneously, they reflect historical changes on a small and large scale that challenge nation-based historiographical approaches. Material evidence of human circulation, distilling methods, goods like ceramics or clothing, and methods of candy or condiment making paints, a rich history of those global networks that for a long time found in Mexico a principal connecting hub, thereby contributing to a decentering of European modernity. The mentioned Asian or Asian-influenced objects and folk traditions represent micro-narratives that metonymically push us toward more encompassing global-scale macro-narratives. So they encourage us to rethink the Mexican history beyond its national borders and from a different vantage point, looking instead at often silenced cross-cultural connections and clashes like slavery, human exploitation, racism, predatory extractivism, intercontinental economic connections, and immigration. Consequently, Mexican history becomes inextricably linked to Asian countries such as China, Japan, Korea, and the Philippines. And to this, we could verily say the same for knowing Philippine history. So, regarding genetic evidence of Filipino ancestry, Juan Esteban Rodriguez, a graduate student in population genetics at the National Lab of Genomics for Biodiversity in Irapuato, Mexico, first planned to study a recent phenomena in the global tapestry that is Mexican ancestry. Starting in the 19th century, many Chinese immigrants moved to Mexico to construct railroads in the country. But to his great surprise, there were more coming from the Philippines and Indonesians. And Rodriguez discovered that about 1/3 of the people sampled in Guerrero, the Pacific coastal state that lies nearly 2,000 kilometers south of the U.S. border, also had up to 10% Asian ancestry, significantly more than most Mexicans. And when he compared their genomes to those of people in Asia today, he found that they were most closely related to populations from the Philippines and Indonesia. And Ricardo Pinzon has delivered a talk on this before. This is the Maganda family in Espinolillo, Costa Grande, Acapulco. This is from Quora. So some of them, they respond to Quora and say, oh, we are Filipinos too. So even today, there are Filipino families in Acapulco and Veracruz. This is another mixed-race family. So what are the other effects of the Galleon trade? Consumerism and ostentation on the part of the Hebs who were privileged to trade. The priests used precious decorations, alhajas, holy vessels, vasos sagrados. San Agustin Church bought solid gold chalices from Mexico encrusted with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, amethyst, gold cruet sets to contain wine or water, and reliquaries heavily decorated with precious jewels from Mexico and gold bells from China. So they also like the high fired ceramics used for storage of food, stuff, and funerary urn. And of course, the enculturation and transculturation happened. So basically, during the Americans came after the Spaniards, and basically we trade in the same items: sugar, copra, hemp. So still, the Philippines is a huge marketplace. It's like a big emporium because it is strategically located and it has a very good harbor suitable for docking of the ships. So sa katapusan, ang nasa kahapon ay nasa kasalukuyan, katulad din naman ng ang nasa kinabukasan ay nasa ngayon. Kaya nga't masidhi ang nais nating mapag-aralan ang buhay na pinagdaanan ng Pilipinas. Ito'y kailangan nating malaman upang maliwanag nating maihanda ang kinabukasan sapagkat ang hindi lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makararating sa paroroonan. So the Galleon age enabled Philippine native sailors to span the Pacific, settle in the Americas, and even to Spain by the late 18th century. Some mariners had also ventured beyond the Spanish world, becoming known as Manila men. They participate in multi-ethnic cruise and registering a small presence in southern Chinese ports linked to European and American commerce, different places in the South Pacific and Australasia, and key ports in British India in the course of the 19th century. After the Galleon age had closed and as Manila was gradually opened to world trade from the 1790s to the 1830s, Manila men would find employment on American, British, French, Japanese, and other foreign vessels and engage in other activities related to seafaring. So today we have so many merchant mariners from the Philippines because Filipinos' ability as excellent sailors in global merchant shipping, as experience in the Manila Galleon, rests on earlier foundations, which have not been included in history books. The Philippines sent out migrant seafarers throughout the island's colonial history with no break between the ending of the Galleon age in 1815 and recruitment into U.S. naval forces. From the beginning of the 20th century, Manila men served on whaling ships and on ships of every kind, and they take up residence in port cities in many continents. They further engage in pearl shell fishing and in naval or port-based mercenary activities. Dispersed around the world, Manila men, according to Filomeno V. Aguilar, continued to identify with the Philippines as their homeland, and many sympathized with the revolution against Spain in 1896. So just a few last words. The past is in the present in the same way that the future is in the present. That is why we have an intense desire to study the past history of Filipinas. We need to know this in order for us to clearly prepare the future because one who does not know how to look back whence one came from will not be able to reach her destination. So, this is the patron saint of for the Manila Galleons because Governor General Juan de Tabora brought it to the Philippines from Mexico in 1626. Maraming salamat po sa Embahada ng Pilipinas sa Mexico, kay Ambassador Lilibeth R. de Apera, kay Ruben Domingo at kay Dr. Damon Woods. Maraming salamat po. Ito po yung mga sources, so if you want to know. No.
Thank you so much po, Dr. Domingo, for that very informative presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for your questions and comments. Kindly raise your hand if you have a question. Yes, Ignacio Nieto, you may ask your question.
Good morning, Dr. Domingo. Good
Yes.
evening to all the
Uh,
fellows in Mexico. First of all, thank you so much for the fascinating presentation. I was very pleased to hear it. I want to make a comment and then I want to ask a question. There is
mhm.
something it wasn't very clear to me. But first, I think we should be extremely careful when we make claims, for example, about the Filipino ancestry of some of the most famous heroes in Mexican history. Perhaps they are not so well known in Philippines, but of course, when you talk about Lázaro Cárdenas, Venustiano Carranza, Emiliano Zapata, o Vicente Guerrero, we should be a little bit careful about if we are going to say they have some Filipino ancestry, and if we are going to do so, we must be able to have a strong source to just give some kind of fundamento to support our claim. In the case, of course, of Vicente Guerrero, it makes sense according from what you explain in this presentation. It perfectly is logical that Vicente Guerrero perhaps have
Yeah.
a Filipino ancestry. That's totally. In the case of Emiliano Zapata, perhaps. But when we talk about Venustiano Carranza, that's also a little bit unlikely. And in the case of Lázaro Cárdenas, it happens a little bit the same. Finally, I would like to ask you something perhaps I understood wrong. It's a detail that troubles me a lot. Are you telling us that most of the crews in the Manila Galleon, they were Filipinos in all the Manila Galleon trade, or it was something more specific, or you are making a reference to something more specific, a specific issue with this Filipino, this Manila Galleon?
I am just at the beginning of my talk. I I I, I said I am also not very aware of our special relationship with Mexico, and these are the stuff the historical footnotes that I found, which are subject to more evidence actually. But I am just reporting what is available right now, mainly from Diego, Javier, and Cejas, those new books that just came out. And that is what they said, no? Specifically in one galleon, mostly it's 50% Filipinos. And in some books, they have the manifest of how many people were in the crew, their place of origin. I could not say that universally for all the galleons, but they say that it is 50% Filipinos.
It's still an incredible high rate. I would expect that most of the crews will be perhaps not from Spain, but definitely from Mexico.
It doesn't matter where.
Most probably, yes. If we could go back, see, all my sources are secondary sources. I have not have the chance to go to primary sources like registers or the manifest of the ships, and some of them are not really available. And the ones that I'm reporting is only the ones that are available right now.
We all have to be very careful about this information. We as students and also as a teachers. But it was still a fascinating presentation.
I
Dr.
totally
Domingo,
agree with you, Senor. I totally.
thank you so much. Salamat po.
Walang anuman po.
Thank you very much, Sir Ignacio, for your comments and questions. Dr. Domingo, we have a question in the chat box from Juan Jaime Giaga. He is asking if you're familiar with the origins of the barong and it's finding its way to Nueva España, or is it like vice versa?
Oh, that is highly contested. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's contested by Mexico, by Cuba, because we really don't know whether the egg came first or the chicken. But as I mentioned in the presentation, we have evidence that the barong existed in the Philippines long before the Spanish colonization of the Philippines. The only difference is they have pockets. Ours don't have pockets. And of course, we're the only ones who use piña as fiber. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We also have a question from Honorary Consul Cue. In the chat box, he was asking, what does Indios Chinos mean? What does this mean?
Oh, Indios Chinos. So at first they were all called Chinos. So Indios Chinos refer to the Filipinos who came from the Philippines. I had a table where it is indicated where they came from, like in places that we know today, like Parañaque, Don Galo.
Yes, I know, but I was confused about the word chinos.
Mhm. Oh, it's a misnomer because it's just like us Filipinos, when we see white people, we call them all Americano because we were exposed to the Americans during D-Day, Victory Day. So even if they are Germans or they are Spaniards, we call them Americano. We say G.I. Joe, hi Joe. So Chinos is the term that's used by the Mexicans or the viceroy or the whoever wrote the history, and they all labeled us as Chinos.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We also have one more question, Dr. Domingo.
Mhm.
In your opinion, what is the legacy of the galleon trade that have become so ingrained and indistinguishable to us Filipinos and even to Mexicans?
Well, of course, Christianity. Some of the food that we eat, we don't know, we shared it. Those are some of the lasting legacy of the Manila Galleon. And of course, we became cosmopolitan.
Pakicheck nga kung tama ang pagkakasaksak ko.
Another question, Dr. Domingo. In which states in Mexico are there people with Filipino ancestry?
I mentioned earlier Guerrero, the coastal towns, Colima. If you will remember the slides I showed, San Blas, Nayarit, those are the places where they have where there are haciendas of coconuts, where there are textile mills because the Filipinos work there. And those slides that I showed you where there are coconut plantations, those are the places where the Filipinos are. Acapulco, Mexico City, Oaxaca.
Okay. I think I saw Mr. Rodrigo Portillo raising his hand. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone, and good morning in Philippines. Just to congratulate Dr. Domingo, because it's one of the best presentations I ever attended. Very documented and really, really, really interesting. So I would like to, not a question, but to encourage her to keep her investigations, and because our history in Mexico is so related with the Philippines. So, and for example, all the exchange of people between both nations is super rich. So if someone wants to know the history, it's alive. It's all the people who is descent from Philippines in Mexico, or descent from Mexicans, or Mexicans New Spaniards in the Philippines. We are a history. The history is not something from the past. It's something that you can you can see, you can shake the hand, you can visit in their own house. So I really congratulate Dr. Domingo, and I hope that you can carry on with your super important investigation, because especially nowadays, which the world is a bit crazy, to find more things in common between our nations, it will make us more strong and more united than find crazy things that divide us with I mean, other crazy situations that happens now. So many congratulations. And also, last but not least, I mean, very important, your comments about the distillation, because here I'm from Guadalajara, and I wrote some text about the tequila, and I did some investigation about the history of this drink, because some of my ancestors were related with this drink, and I gave a lecture in Edinburgh in 2006 about this. And nowadays there's still a great debate about the distillation, and because of everything you said, it's very easy to prove that the distillation was imported from the Philippines, because the region of Colima is very close from the south part of Jalisco, where the most ancient records of the distillation of the mezcal wine, which was the name of the tequila in those days, well, the most ancient records of this distillation of this mezcal wine, nowadays tequila, is from parts which are in Jalisco, which had a border with Colima. So it's not crazy to think that from Colima, then the distillation process arrived in Jalisco, and then go north to Tequila Town. Nowadays, Tequila Town is the most important place where mezcal wine was made. So that in the 19th century, Tequila Town was very famous because it was in the route from Guadalajara to San Blas port. And because of that, the mezcal wine from tequila later on adopted the name of tequila, because it was very famous because of San Blas. So thank you very much for your super important lecture. Thank you very much to the Philippine Embassy and to the ambassador and all the Philippine team, to Marisa, the vice consul, and all the team, because these small lectures are just an enormous light that hopefully will light many people in both sides of the ocean. Best of luck, and
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sir Rodrigo, for your comments. Thank you so much. Given the time constraints, I'm afraid I have to close the floor to questions and comments. At this juncture, I would like to request all the participants here to please indulge us and turn on your camera just for a quick group photo, if you don't mind, please. All our participants.
Okay, first slide, smile please. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Keep smiling. Second slide. 1, 3. Okay. Third slide. 1, 2, 3. And the last slide. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ms. Aza, for your assistance. At this point, I'd like to call on Ms. Marissa Winkler, Third Secretary and Vice Consul of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, for the closing remarks. Vice Consul?
Thank you, NJ. Una sa lahat, ako, on behalf of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, kami po ay nagpapasalamat sa ating resource speaker, si Dr. Ninita Domingo, at sa ating mga participants. We've been doing this for more than 1 year, and we had a lot of episodes, but every time you always learn something new. That was very interesting and comprehensive, Dr. Domingo. Thank you very much. And you may wonder that she mixed it with some Filipino words. I want to emphasize that today, actually in the Philippines yesterday, it's International Mother Language Day. So I'm very happy na narinig niyo din ang aming Filipino language, ang aming mother tongue sa Philippines. We have two official languages, Filipino and English, but Filipino is our mother tongue. So thank you also for doing that, Dr. Domingo. And thank you sa lahat, and we hope na sa next nating mga episodes, you will be with us, and please invite more. Again, for this episode, it's very well attended. We have like almost 160 participants, full. Ang ating Zoom full siya, tapos the others are watching online sa ating YouTube channel. So maraming salamat, and those who are watching via YouTube channel, you can still fill out the feedback form so you can receive your certificates through this QR code and the link. Please take a photo. And that's all. Magandang gabi, magandang umaga sa inyong lahat.
Thank you so much, Vice Consul Marissa. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us today here on Zoom and also on our YouTube channel. We apologize for not being able to send the link due to the guidelines of YouTube, but we're now sharing the QR code and the link to the evaluation of our episode. And of course, thank you very much to Dr. Domingo. Maraming salamat po, Doctor, for a very informative presentation. With that said, happy Friday, happy Saturday, and God bless everyone.